Hey everybody, I hope y'all are having a fantastic week. Yes, we continue our lessons looking at uncertainty. Today we're going to look at hope in dark times. Hope in dark times. And just thinking about that, and you kind of really can, understand the importance of this is, we are living in dark times. We're living in times whenever people have no hope, or the hope they have is misplaced. It's put in the wrong places. And so as we look today, we're going to see how we as Christians can respond and have hope whenever doesn't seem to be any hope anywhere. So what we're going to do is today we're going to look at several passages, and we're also going to look at a man in the Bible who lost a lot, who struggled, who everything pretty much he owned and was precious to him was taken away, but yet he never gave up hope. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at Paul's life and see some of that in Paul's life today. So, we as Christians have something different. We're living in rough times right now. With coronavirus, with all this political unrest, with what's going on in Afghanistan, there's a lot of people are losing hope, and the things they had their hope in, they're losing. They're losing it. They're not able to have it. They've lost hope, and they fall into despair, anger, frustration, go through all these different emotions. But yet, for us as Christians, we have something that we can hope in even whenever everything else seems lost. Whenever everything else is uncertain, when there's no hope, we have a hope that we find in Jesus that can give us the strength to get through it. Last week we talked about that, fear and anxiety, and Christ coming along and always being there with us. Whenever we go through rough times, He comes alongside of us to direct us and lead us to where we need to go. There's never been a time that I can remember where something has affected the world, around the world, like this, like the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. I'm almost 40 years old, and I can't remember a single thing like this. September 11th, while yes, it did affect the world, there's a lot of people that, like I said, we lived in a society where in America it affected us more because it was an attack on us. But this is something that's affected everyone worldwide. Every nation, every country has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic in some way, shape, or form. There's always been other pandemics and other things like that, but it's never been on the scale of this. I think a couple years ago there was the Ebola scare, where there was, a bunch of cases that they found in Africa. Well, there's a couple of cases where they got people here in the United States. And, people started to panic a little bit there, but it really didn't affect us on the same way that this did. The truth is that tough times just are a part of life. That's just part of us being human. That's just part of us having to deal with everything. Is we are going to go through rough times. We're going to go through hard times. We're going to go through times whenever we struggle. We struggle and maybe start to question our faith. We start to question our beliefs. There's going to be those times whenever that happens. That is part of life. Hard times are part of life. We're not guaranteed an easy life just because we're Christian. No, we're not guaranteed that at all. But yet, we know we have a hope. We have hope in God, and knowing that He's there with us and He's there beside us to strengthen us and give us the ability to get through whatever situation it is that we are going through in our lives right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read a couple passages from Paul's epistle to the church at Corinth, in 2 Corinthians. So we're going to read 2 Corinthians chapter 23, verses through 27. So it says here, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings and often near death, 5 times I received at the hand of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A day and a night I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, dangers from false brothers, in toil and hardships, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and in thirst, often without food and cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there was in my pressure me the anxiety of all the churches. So we see here just a couple of the things that Paul dealt with. He dealt with imprisonment. He was imprisoned several times in his life. for preaching the gospel. And there was a lot of people who were being imprisoned for preaching the gospel, preaching the good news that Jesus had given them in this time. That was just part of it. And not just that, he dealt with a lot of natural things. Things that didn't have anything to do with him preaching. He went through hard times whenever he was shipwrecked. He was out in the cold. He went hungry. He was under attack from people, his own people. He was under attack from Gentiles. He was under attack from false teachers that were trying to skew the gospel. But yet, he stayed faithful through it all. He faced tough times. Think about how you would feel if you were him. If you were Paul going through these same things, going through these same struggles, how would you feel? How would you feel? It's hard for us to think about that, but we got to understand that's just how part of life is going through these things. And sometimes it seems like the things we go through just adds on one after another, after another, after another, after another. All in sequence. And that's what we'll look at later when we look at the life of, if you haven't figured it out already, we're going to look at Job a little bit here and a little bit later. So now we're going to read how Paul dealt with these things. And he dealt with these in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. So we see this is that Paul experienced anxiety and stress in his life. I think all of us do. As you grow older, your anxiety and stress changes. It changes from, what am I going to do in school, or how am I going to do on this test, to providing for your family, taking care of your kids. It changes a little bit for us. It says Paul talks in here. He says we're pressed on every side. We're on every side. We're pushed in to despair. We're pushed in to the point where we lose hope. We lose hope. We can't see what's ahead of us. We don't know, and that's what we get to in our Christian life sometimes. Sometimes we get to that point, time and time again, where we get pigeonholed in to a certain place, into a situation, and it causes us pain. Paul here, he doesn't diminish the pain and say, "Oh, you shouldn't be feeling pain. You shouldn't be having these feelings of stress and anxiety and all those things." Well, no. He doesn't diminish them. He just doesn't discount them. He felt it, but they're not part of his words that we want to focus on. He doesn't want us to focus on these things. Because remember we talked about last week, when you focus on something, it becomes what you seek after more and more and more. It's kind of like we talked about fear and worry last week. If you focus on your fear, you just become so fearful that you're afraid to step outside of your house. You're afraid to go across the street. You're afraid to go to the store. You're afraid to do all these things. But that's not how we should live our life when we focus on that. When we focus on God, He becomes our sole purpose. I think I mentioned this last week. I don't remember, but I think of like the Olympians, because we just came off of the Olympics in 2020. Well, the 2020 Olympics that happened in 2021 because of the pandemic, but we just came off the Olympics and seeing those people. Those people worked hard. They sacrificed. They focused on one thing and one thing alone: going there and winning a medal. Going there and representing their country and winning a gold medal. That was their focus of every single Olympian there. Now, some of them didn't do it, but some of them did. And so their focus became to be prepared for the Olympics. And went, they succeeded, and they were there. Let's listen to these words again. We are pressed hard on every side, but not perplexed. But not crushed, We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. Struck down, but not destroyed. Paul could face anything knowing that God was with him. He was able to face anything. He was able to face the persecution of the government. He was able to face going out in the wilderness, dealing with hunger, dealing with beatings, dealing with people bringing up false teachings and trying to change his teachings. He was able to deal with all those for one reason and one reason alone. He had Christ with him. He had Christ with him. It's the same for us. Jesus is always with us. He's always with us. He's always our hope. He can always give us hope whenever everything seems dark. Whenever all hope is lost, he can give us the hope that we need. He can give us that hope. That's the treasure of Christ living in us that gives us that hope. That's the best thing about Christ living in us, is that he gives us the strength to get through these things, knowing that he's in control. But regardless of the situation, Jesus is the one who brings hope. He's the one who brings hope to our lives. Now let's go and look at the book of Job. And as we go to the book of Job, I'm going to read several passages throughout the book of Job, but some of them are very interesting, and we see that how much Job really truly lost. How much he lost. And so we're going to see that here. So, there's always going to be suffering, and we as Christians aren't immune to suffering. Just because we're Christians, just because we accepted Christ into our heart, doesn't mean that we're not going to deal with rough times. We're not going to suffer. There's Christians suffering all around the world today. There is. You look at the church in China, the church in Afghanistan, the church all over is just suffering because they're Christians. Because they name the name of Christ, they do not waver, they face persecution, and they still go out and share the gospel. Yet we as in America can't go out and share the gospel because we just don't. Because we're so blessed. We think we're everyone knows, and so we don't need to. But yet, maybe we need to more than ever here in America to tell people about our faith, to share our faith with God. A lot of times we ask the questions whenever things go wrong. And maybe you've heard people ask this, well, why did the COVID-19 happen? Why did God allow people to die from coronavirus? Why did God allow coronavirus to happen? If he's a good God, couldn't he have stopped it? God can do anything. God could have stopped coronavirus. But I believe there's a reason for everything that God does. But yet we may not know it until later. We don't understand the suffering that we go through and why we're suffering sometimes until later. And so we're going to look here at the book of Job. And, Job, it's okay to ask God why. I think sometimes we think that that's questioning God, but sometimes we just truly want to know why we're going through something. It's like my son, Titus. Whenever I think of him, I think of him asking questions. He's always asking, well, why, Daddy? Why, Daddy? Why, Daddy? Not whenever I ask him something or ask him to do something. But sometimes like, well, why is it this way? Why does this happen? Why is the sky blue? All these different things that he asks. He just really, truly wants to know the answer. And sometimes I think that's okay for us to ask God those if we're not questioning God, but we just really want to understand why something is happening to us, why we're going through suffering, why we're going through these things. And so it's not that we're questioning God, it's just that we want to know. And maybe God will tell us then, maybe he won't, maybe he'll tell us later, we'll find out. And sometimes, we won't find out here on earth. But everything for Job fell apart in his life. He lost everything that was precious to him. I'm just going to read a couple verses in chapter 1, then skip to chapter 2. There's a man in the land named Uz, whose name was Job. And this man was blameless, upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There was born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people in the east. Now verse 14 to 22. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and they consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and the house fell, and it fell upon the young people. And they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came into my mother's womb, and naked naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. And then we're going to read verses 7 through 10 of chapter 2. So Satan went out from the presence of Job and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which he to scrape himself, and he set in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women who would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And it goes on. And it goes on. The book of Job is 42 chapters long. We're not going to sit here and read all this because, we'll be here, for a while. But, in essence, here's what happened. Job had some friends who came to him. Job went through a lot. Job dealt with a lot. As we see here, he lost everything that was precious to him. He lost his livestock. He lost his servants. He lost his kids. He even lost his health. His wife wasn't encouraging. She wasn't saying, oh, well, pray to God to see what's going on. No, she said, curse God, and die. Just curse God, just be done with it. Because there's nothing worth living. You've lost everything. But Job didn't see it that way. And we see that, Job didn't sin with his lips. He didn't curse God. He didn't forsake God. He never betrayed God. He still trusted in God. He still believed in God. And God blessed him. And we'll read that a little bit later here in a second. But, Job's friends, Job's wife tried to get him to turn away from God. So here's, what we can learn from God. Is you see, Job asked questions of God. We see here Job asked questions as he was going through the suffering. He wanted to understand what was going on. When we go through tough times, we might have questions for God too. And that's okay. See, like I talked about earlier, it's okay to have questions for God, but not to question God. God's sovereign. God's in control. He knows what's going on. But yet, for us, that's just questions to say, well, why God? Why God have you allowed this to happen? Why? Not, well, why God? There's a difference in those. And it's perfectly normal. Talk about these with your family and friends. Talk about with someone who you trust, someone who can guide you and direct you, a good Christian person who can help you to understand more about God and His sovereignty and His control over the entire universe. Take time to wrestle through them. Take just time to wrestle through these questions. It's hard for us to go through these things, but yet we got to understand that God's in control. He knows what's going on, and He wants what's best for us. Another thing we see is that God spoke to Job through this storm in his life. God spoke to Job through this time. And one of the things that He said is God is God. God's in control. He was telling him once again, God's sovereign. God's bigger than the situations that we go through. God's bigger than the coronavirus pandemic. God's bigger than whatever other situation you may be dealing with or going through in your life. God is bigger than those. God's bigger than those. He's in control. He's on the throne. He knows what's happening. And He also notices our suffering. He knows what we're going through. He knows what we're going through. He knows. And He's there to strengthen us and give us the strength to get through those things that we go through. Another lesson is that although Job was horrified with these situations, eventually he was able to move on. Eventually he's able to move on. So there is hope when you go through rough times. There is hope whenever you may lose everything in your life. There's hope. The coronavirus vaccine is going to pass. Pain and suffering is going to pass. It's not going to last forever. There's always going to be times whenever things happen, whether you're dealing with the loss of a loved one or something where things are going to come to your memory and you're going to have that pain, but it's going to be temporary. It's going to be temporary. It's easy to think the tough time you face will never end when you're in it. It really is. It's something to think, I'm never going to get through this. I'm never going to be able to be back to normal. But yet, you will be at some point. And we see not only, does God see what goes on, knows what goes on, but yet, in the life of Job, God restored everything to him. He restored everything back to him that was taken. So we're going to read in Job chapter 42, verses 10 through 17. And it says, "And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, which when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came to him all his brothers and sisters, and all whom had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comfort for all the evil the Lord had brought on him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first of his daughter Jemimah, and the name of the second daughter Kezia, and the name of the third Karen Hepcha. And in the land there was no woman more so beautiful than Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. And after this Job lived 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons 4 generations. And Job died an old man and full of days." God may not always bless us and bring us back to the point where if he takes something away from us, he restores fully. But yet, he may restore in other ways. He may give you other things to bless your life. And that's where we have to put our hope in, is knowing that God knows what's there. He cares for us. He wants us to be successful. He wants us to be there for him. We just have to trust in him. And when we trust in him, he'll bless us. He'll bless us. And so we just have to trust in God and give us hope when we go through rough times. Because rough times will happen. We're human. We're going to go through challenges. We're going to go through hard times. We just have to trust that God is good. He's in control. And he wants what's best for us. What's best for us. If y'all have any questions, definitely, reach out to me. Let me know. Thank y'all for watching, and have a fantastic week.